We're going to talk about the Constitution, and we're going to also talk about the legitimate role of government in a free society, which is about our Constitution. Now, in the course of the few introductory remarks that I'm going to make, I'm going to say some things that may sound mean, uncaring, politically incorrect, but should we have an opportunity to ask questions, you need not feel as though you owe me any undue courtesy because I'm your guest. Raise hard questions. Don't worry about embarrassing me. I am unembarrassable. The only way you could possibly embarrass me is suggest that I wasn't pretty good in basketball. And that's a matter of ethnic pride that I take seriously. A major justification for the growth of government far beyond what the founders envisioned for us was to promote fairness and justice. That's a worthy goal, but we might also ask, well, what is fairness and justice? What is the legitimate role of government in a free society? Let me spend a few moments discussing what the founders and the framers of the United States Constitution saw as the legitimate role of government. And to do that, let's turn to the rule book that they gave us, namely the United States Constitution. Most of what the founders saw as the legitimate role for the federal government is found in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. And I urge you to read Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution to see what the framers of the Constitution gave, the powers that the framers of the Constitution gave to the United States Congress. Let me just briefly quote sections thereof of Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. It says, Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts, and provide for the common defense and the general welfare of the United States. The framers of the Constitution also authorized Congress to borrow money on the credit of the United States, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes, to coin money. Congress has the power to coin money, to establish post office and post roads, and to raise and support armies. The framers of the Constitution granted Congress taxing and spending authority for these and a few other activities. Namely, if you just count what Congress is authorized to do in the Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, the so-called the enumerated powers, it turns out that Congress is authorized to do 22 things. Now, nowhere in the Constitution do we find authority for Congress to tax and spend for up to 3/4 of what Congress taxes and spends today. In other words, there is no constitutional authority for crop subsidies, bank bailouts, food stamp, not to mention midnight basketball. I think that we can safely say that we've made a significant departure from the constitutional principles of individual freedom and limited government that made us a rich nation in the first place. These principles of freedom were embodied in our nation through the combined institutions of private ownership of property and free enterprise. Now, through numerous successful attacks, private property and free enterprise are mere skeletons of their past. And Thomas Jefferson anticipated this when he said, and I'm quoting him, he said that the natural progress of things is for government to gain ground and for liberty to yield. And one of the best ways of looking at how government is gaining ground and liberty yielding is to look at what Congress has done to taxation and spending, and Congress along with state and local governments as well. And let me just give you an idea of this. First, taxes represent government claims on private property. If government were to tax private property at 100%, it would confiscate private property. An even better measure of what Congress does is to look at what has happened to spending. In 1902, expenditures at all levels of government totaled $1.7 billion. The average taxpayer paid $60 in federal, state, and local taxes. In fact, from 1787 until 1925, federal expenditures were only 3% of the GDP, except during wartime. Today, federal expenditures alone are over $4 trillion, or 25% of the GDP. State and local governments spend close to $3 trillion, and the average taxpayer today spends well over $10,000 a year in federal, state, and local taxes. And the reason why we're doing this, why we've come to spending that much in government, is because we've left the Constitution. James Madison, who is the acknowledged father of the Constitution, he was trying to explain to the citizens of New York, he was trying to get them to ratify the Constitution, and he and two other people, John Jay and Hamilton, wrote the Federalist Papers. And the Federalist Papers are written to try to convince the citizens of New York and elsewhere to ratify the Constitution, because it was a difficult job getting the Constitution ratified. And in Federalist Paper 45, Madison explains to the people that the powers that we've given the federal government are few and well-defined, and restricted mostly to external affairs. Those left with the people and the states are indefinite and numerous. Now, if you turn that upside down, you have what we have today. The powers of the federal government are indefinite and numerous, and the powers of the people and the state are restricted and defined. And you can just see this if you ask yourself, what can you citizens do, you citizens of Missouri, do without federal government permission? It's very little that you can do. You can't even decide how many gallons of water to use in your toilet without federal permission. What speeds to drive in your highway, and all other regulations without getting government's federal permission.